The courthouse was humming with its usual morning energy. Lawyers in dark suits hurried past, clients fidgeted in wooden benches, and bailiffs quietly maintained order. In courtroom 3B, the air was heavy with the anticipation of another routine hearing, a small criminal case that had drawn only a modest crowd. The judge, a man known for his stern demeanor and quick wit, sat behind his bench, shuffling papers and scanning the docket dot. Suddenly, the quiet shuffle of footsteps echoed sharply as a young man entered through the side door. He looked like any other teenager, slim, clean-shaven, with a tidy haircut and a hint of nervousness in his eyes. But something about him was different. His crisp black suit was impeccably tailored, his white shirt perfectly pressed. Over his shoulder hung a leather messenger bag that looked far too professional for a casual visitor. Whispers spread like wildfire through the courtroom. A woman clutching her purse nudged the man next to her and whispered, "Isn't that the kid from the youth law program?" A few heads nodded. The court officer at the door gave a questioning glance, but allowed him to pass. He strode purposefully to the defense table and took a seat without hesitation. The judge finally looked up, adjusting his glasses, his gaze landing on the young man. A slow smirk crept across his face. "Young man," he said, his voice carrying a sarcastic edge, "this isn't some school field trip. Are you lost?" A ripple of laughter spread through the room. The teen sat still, eyes calm, and replied quietly, "No, Your Honor. I am here as counsel for my client." The courtroom fell into stunned silence. The judge's eyebrows shot up in surprise. He leaned forward, resting his arms on the bench. "Counsel? At your age? Are you certain?" The teen nodded and reached into his briefcase. Slowly, he pulled out a neat stack of papers: bar license, appointment letters, case files. He laid them carefully on the table and said, "I passed the bar last year through the Accelerated Youth Legal Program. I am fully licensed and authorized to represent my client." The judge stared at the documents, momentarily speechless. He signaled the clerk, who rose and walked over to verify the credentials. The courtroom buzzed with renewed interest. Some spectators whispered excitedly. Others exchanged doubtful glances. The teen, however, sat quietly, hands folded, radiating a quiet confidence far beyond his years. After a tense moment, the clerk returned and confirmed the validity of the documents. The judge cleared his throat, trying to regain his authority. "Very well, counselor," he said, his tone colder now. "Let's proceed, but I expect you to follow courtroom protocol strictly." The teen nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." As the judge called the case, the gallery leaned forward in their seats. All eyes were on the young lawyer now. The prosecution team, seasoned and battle-hardened, exchanged surprised looks. One whispered to a colleague, "Did they really send a teenager to defend this case?" The teen flipped open his case file and began to organize his notes. His hands were steady, his breath even. Despite the earlier mockery, he was ready. His client, a middle-aged woman accused of petty theft, looked at him with a mix of hope and uncertainty. The teen caught her eye and gave a reassuring nod. Judge banged his gavel to call the court to order. The trial was about to begin. But no one in the courtroom could have guessed that the day's events would quickly turn from a laughing matter into a courtroom drama that no one would forget. The courtroom settled back into an uneasy quiet, but the atmosphere remained charged with disbelief. The judge, still clearly surprised by the young attorney's credentials, tried to mask his skepticism. He leaned forward, tapping his gavel lightly. "Counselor," he said with a faint smirk, "are you certain you're prepared to proceed? This is not a classroom exercise." His voice carried just enough mockery to remind everyone of his initial doubts. The teen met the judge's gaze without hesitation. "I am prepared, Your Honor," he said calmly. I have reviewed the evidence thoroughly and am ready to present my case. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge frowned slightly, realizing this young man wasn't just reciting rehearsed lines. There was a steadiness, a quiet authority in his tone. The prosecution attorney, a middle-aged woman known for her sharp cross-examinations, exchanged a surprised glance with her colleague. "This could be interesting," she whispered under her breath. But she kept her poker face intact as the trial began. The teen started his opening statement. At first, his voice was soft, almost hesitant. But as he spoke, it grew stronger, more confident. He outlined the facts of the case with clear precision, describing the timeline and key pieces of evidence. His words were carefully chosen, and he spoke without rushing or hesitation. Every now and then, he glanced at his client with reassurance, reminding her that he was there to fight for her. The judge's smirk began to fade as he listened. The courtroom's mood shifted subtly. Spectators who had initially whispered and giggled were now silent, their attention fully captured. Even the bailiff stopped pacing and leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the teen. When the prosecutor rose for her opening statement, her voice was firm and authoritative. She portrayed the defendant as guilty beyond reasonable doubt. But the young attorney listened carefully, nodding slightly as she spoke, mentally preparing for his rebuttal. The first witness was called, a store clerk who claimed to have seen the defendant take an item without paying. The prosecution questioned him thoroughly, but the young defense attorney noticed a flicker of uncertainty in the man's eyes. When it was his turn, the teen approached the witness calmly. His questions were direct but polite, designed to reveal inconsistencies without appearing aggressive. He pointed out that the clerk's memory of the exact time was vague, and that the surveillance footage was unclear. The judge watched closely as the witness struggled to maintain his confidence. The teen's style was unorthodox for someone his age. He relied on logic and patience, rather than intimidation or theatrics. As the cross-examination ended, a ripple of approval spread through the courtroom. Some people exchanged surprised looks, as if they hadn't expected the young lawyer to hold his ground so effectively. The next witness was an expert who testified about the defendant's alleged behavior that day. Again, the teen questioned. The expert with well-prepared inquiries that gently undermined the certainty of the testimony. The judge's eyes narrowed. He seemed both impressed and unsettled. At one point, the judge interrupted, asking the teen to clarify a legal point. The young lawyer responded confidently, citing relevant case law and legal principles. The judge paused, then nodded slowly, signaling his acceptance. This was a subtle but clear sign of respect. Throughout the morning, the teen's performance steadily dismantled the prosecution's case. His thorough preparation was evident. He used every opportunity to highlight doubts and inconsistencies. The courtroom was no longer a place of mockery, but a battleground where the courtroom was no longer a place of mockery. Young attorney was proving himself. By the time the morning session ended, the judge called a recess. As the crowd filed out, many whispered among themselves about the surprising turn of events. The teen gathered his papers, his face calm but determined. Outside the courtroom, a reporter who had been quietly observing approached him. "Excuse me," she said, "can I ask you a few questions?" The teen smiled, politely but declined, saying, "I'm focused on the case. Thank you." Back inside, the judge remained seated, his expression unreadable. For the first time that morning, the room was filled with a sense of anticipation. The simple mockery that had opened the day was quickly fading into something else, respect tinged with a hint of awe. When the courtroom reconvened after the recess, the energy in the room had changed palpably. Spectators who had arrived with skepticism now leaned forward, eyes sharp and expectant. The judge tapped his gavel firmly, signaling the resumption of the trial. "Let's proceed," he said, his voice carrying a new note, one of cautious respect. The young attorney straightened his jacket and opened his case file. His hands were steady, his breath measured. He looked briefly at his client, a woman who had spent the morning oscillating between hope and anxiety. Then he faced the jury with a quiet confidence that captured their attention. His opening statement was a study in poise and clarity. Instead of relying on dramatic flourishes, he focused on facts, weaving them together with precision. He acknowledged the seriousness of the charges against his client, but emphasized the importance of reasonable doubt. His words carried weight beyond his years. The judge watched closely, occasionally jotting notes. The prosecution, meanwhile, appeared unsettled. The middle-aged attorney who had opened the case now wore a subtle frown, as if realizing that this trial was slipping beyond her usual command. Next came the first witness, a security guard from the store where the alleged theft took place. The prosecution's questioning was pointed, aiming to establish the defendant's presence near the scene. The guard's testimony was straightforward, but not without hesitation. His memory of certain details was vague. When it was the young lawyer's turn to cross-examine, he approached with a calm demeanor. His questions were carefully crafted to expose uncertainty without seeming confrontational. He asked about the lighting in the store, the guard's exact vantage point, and the reliability of the security cameras. The guard hesitated. The cameras, they didn't catch everything, he admitted. There were blind spots. The courtroom stirred quietly. The defense attorney nodded thoughtfully, pressing gently on the point that the evidence was incomplete. The judge's eyes narrowed slightly, intrigued by the methodical dismantling of the prosecution's narrative. The witness's testimony had become less conclusive under the young lawyer's probing. The second witness, called by the prosecution, was a forensic expert who testified about the physical evidence supposedly linking the defendant to the alleged theft. His voice was confident, but when the defense questioned him about the chain of custody and potential contamination, cracks appeared. The defense attorney highlighted how the evidence had been handled by multiple people and how crucial details were missing from the reports. The expert's answers became less assured as the questions probed deeper. The jury listened carefully, some exchanging glances. Throughout the morning, the young attorney maintained his composure, switching smoothly between direct examination of witnesses for the defense and cross-examination of the prosecution's experts. He showed an impressive grasp of legal procedure, objecting at just the right moments and supporting his claims with well-chosen precedents. At one point, the judge interjected with a question about a legal technicality. The young attorney responded immediately, citing a lesser-known but relevant case that clarified the issue. The judge nodded approvingly, a rare smile flickering briefly across his face. The defense's case was solidifying into a compelling narrative. The prosecution had failed to provide clear, irrefutable evidence. Doubt had been cast on key witness accounts, and the physical evidence was called into question. The prosecution, sensing the tide turning, tried to regain control by calling a surprise witness, a store employee who claimed to have overheard the defendant confess. But under cross-examination, the young attorney skillfully exposed inconsistencies in her story, noting how stress and pressure could affect memory. As the afternoon wore on, the courtroom was captivated. What had started as a spectacle, a teenager representing a defendant, was transforming into a gripping legal battle. The judge, once ready to dismiss the young attorney as a mere curiosity, now regarded him with a mix of surprise and respect. Judge called for another recess and adjourned for the day. The young lawyer packed his papers calmly, aware that the most challenging parts of the trial still lay ahead. Outside the courtroom, murmurs of admiration had begun to circulate. Even the prosecution team was quietly re-evaluating their approach. Teen stepped outside into the sunlight, taking a deep breath. This was just the beginning, but he was ready. His preparation, determination, and quiet strength had already shifted the balance. The courtroom would never look at him the same way again. After the morning session resumed, the young attorney's performance took on a new intensity. No longer was he the timid teenager who had just entered the courtroom. Now he was a focused advocate, dissecting every detail of the prosecution's case with surgical precision. The atmosphere was electric. Spectators sat forward in their seats, watching as the courtroom drama unfolded. The first prosecution witness, a store clerk who claimed to have seen the defendant take an item without paying, was called to the stand. The clerk's voice was steady, but under close questioning, it became clear that his memory was far from perfect. The defense attorney approached with calm confidence, carefully probing for inconsistencies. "Mr. Daniels," the young lawyer began, "you said you saw my client take the item around 3 p.m., correct?" The clerk nodded. "But you also testified that there was a crowd in the aisle at that time. How certain are you that it was my client you saw?" The clerk hesitated, his eyes flickering nervously. "Well, I'm pretty sure." The lawyer pressed, gently but persistently, asking about lighting conditions, the presence of other customers, and the angle from which the clerk had observed the aisle. Each question chipped away at the witness's certainty. The judge watched intently, clearly impressed by the methodical approach. The witness's confidence waned, and by the end of the cross-examination, several jurors exchanged thoughtful glances. The prosecution's foundation seemed less solid than before. Next came a forensic expert who testified about the physical evidence purportedly linking the defendant to the crime scene. His statements were initially authoritative, but the defense attorney's questions revealed gaps in the chain of custody and raised doubts about sample contamination. "You mentioned the evidence was collected and stored by multiple handlers. Is that correct?" the young lawyer asked. "Yes," replied the expert. "Is it possible that improper handling could affect the validity of these samples?" "It's possible, yes." The courtroom murmured. The judge leaned forward, eyebrows raised, as the defense planted seeds of doubt that grew with each answer. Throughout the session, the teen maintained his composure, skillfully navigating objections and responding with poise when challenged. His voice was steady, his arguments clear and supported by legal precedents he quoted precisely. The courtroom, once filled with whispers of disbelief, was now captivated. The judge, too, seemed to be shifting. His earlier dismissiveness gave way to a more measured tone. When the defense attorney made a well-timed objection to a piece of evidence citing a rarely used statute, the judge immediately ruled in his favor. It was a subtle but significant sign of respect. At one point, the judge interrupted the proceedings to ask a legal question regarding the admissibility of certain evidence. The young attorney answered promptly, quoting a case that had set important precedent in similar circumstances. The judge nodded appreciatively, a faint smile breaking his usual stern expression. The prosecution tried to regain control by calling a surprise witness, a store employee who claimed to have overheard the defendant admitting guilt in a private conversation. However, the defense attorney's calm, strategic cross-examination exposed inconsistencies in her statement. He suggested that her recollections were influenced by workplace rumors and personal bias, and that stress could have affected her memory. The jury was visibly attentive. The courtroom had transformed from a scene of mockery into a place of serious legal battle. The young attorney had proven that he was more than just a novelty. He was a skilled advocate fighting for justice. As the afternoon session drew to a close, the judge announced a recess. Spectators whispered excitedly among themselves, many exchanging surprised looks and quietly praising the teenager's performance. The prosecution team gathered in a huddle, their faces marked by concern. Outside the courtroom, reporters took notes eagerly. The story was no longer just about the young lawyer's age, but about his undeniable skill and professionalism. The teen gathered his files with practiced ease. His calm exterior masked the determination burning within. He knew the stakes were high, but he was ready to continue the fight. The judge banged his gavel. "We will resume tomorrow morning. Court is adjourned." As people filed out, the courtroom buzzed with new energy. The teenager had not only defended his client, but had also shattered expectations. The courtroom reconvened after lunch, but an unmistakable shift had settled over the proceedings. The judge, who had started the day with a dismissive attitude toward the young attorney, now sat upright with a furrowed brow, carefully scrutinizing every word spoken. The once casual smirk had vanished, replaced by a quiet seriousness. He was no longer dealing with a teenager trying to play lawyer. He was facing a skilled professional who demanded respect. During the break, the judge had asked his clerk to pull the young attorney's file. Alone in his chambers, he read through the documents carefully. The biography was remarkable. The teen had accelerated through high school and college, graduating law school by the age of 17. He had passed the bar exam on his first attempt, and had been practicing under supervision in a specialized youth legal mentorship program designed for prodigies. The judge exhaled slowly, realizing how unfair his initial assumptions had been. Returning to the courtroom, the judge's demeanor reflected this newfound understanding. His questions to both sides became more precise and measured, ensuring the trial adhered strictly to the rule of law. There was no room for dismissive remarks or casual jokes. The prosecution tried to regroup, but the momentum had clearly shifted. The young defense attorney continued to dismantle their case with methodical precision. He pointed out the holes in their evidence one by one, weaving a narrative of reasonable doubt that grew stronger with each witness. One key moment came when the defense called an expert witness in forensic analysis. The expert testified about how certain samples, allegedly linking the defendant to the crime, had been mishandled. The defense attorney's questioning revealed gaps in the chain of custody and potential contamination risks. The courtroom listened intently as the expert acknowledged these weaknesses. The judge leaned forward during the testimony, listening closely. The young lawyer's line of questioning was clear and effective, leaving little room for dispute. It was evident to all that the defense had prepared meticulously. At another point, the judge interrupted the proceedings with a question about the admissibility of some evidence. The defense attorney answered promptly, citing precedents and legal standards. The judge nodded in approval, clearly impressed by the young man's knowledge and composure. Outside the courtroom, whispers of admiration were spreading. Court staff and spectators alike were talking about the teenager's performance. A few reporters who had been covering the case discreetly exchanged notes, sensing a story that went far beyond the usual courtroom drama. Back inside, the prosecution attempted to salvage their case by calling a witness who claimed to have overheard incriminating statements from the defendant. But under calm, strategic questioning, the young attorney exposed contradictions and motives that cast serious doubt on the witness's reliability. As the afternoon progressed, the courtroom atmosphere grew tense. The defense attorney was no longer the underdog. He was a formidable opponent. His calm demeanor under pressure contrasted sharply with the increasing frustration visible on the prosecution's faces. The judge caught himself several times nodding subtly in agreement with points the defense made. It was clear that the young attorney had not only earned the court's respect, but was also shaping the trial's outcome. By the time the day's proceedings ended, the courtroom was filled with a buzz of anticipation. The defense's case had turned from a mere challenge to a credible threat against the prosecution's narrative. The judge banged his gavel. "We will recess until tomorrow morning," he announced, his voice carrying a new tone of seriousness. "Counselor, your preparation and knowledge have been noted." As the spectators filed out, many paused to whisper their amazement. The young attorney gathered his papers carefully, his face calm but determined. He knew that the coming days would be critical, But for now, he had made his mark. Outside, a reporter approached him once more, this time more politely. "Young man, what's your secret? How did you prepare so well for this case?" The teen smiled faintly. "Hard work, focus, and respect for the law," he replied simply before walking away, ready to face whatever came next. The next morning, the atmosphere in courtroom 3B was thick with anticipation. Word had spread beyond the courthouse walls. The young attorney's sharp performance had captured the attention of legal professionals and the public alike. The gallery was more crowded than before, filled with curious onlookers and reporters eager to witness what many were now calling a modern courtroom miracle. The judge arrived early, taking his seat with a renewed sense of respect. His usual stern gaze softened slightly as he glanced at the young lawyer. No longer the mockery he'd been the day before, the teen now commanded a quiet authority that was impossible to ignore. During a brief recess before proceedings began, the judge had requested a private meeting with the court clerk. The clerk pulled a file from the records cabinet and handed it to the judge, who scanned it quickly. Inside were documents detailing the young attorney's extraordinary background, an accelerated academic path, prestigious internships, and a string of impressive moot court victories. He had passed the bar exam at just 17, one of the youngest in the state's history. The judge leaned back in his chair, absorbing the information. He realized his initial judgment had been not just premature, but unfair. This wasn't just a teenager playing at law. This was a prodigy, a young man who had earned his place through sheer talent and dedication. Returning to the courtroom, the judge's tone reflected this revelation. "Counselor," he said during the morning session, "I've reviewed your credentials in detail. You have demonstrated exceptional knowledge and skill. This court will treat your arguments accordingly." The young attorney acknowledged the statement with a polite nod, but remained humble, his focus unwavering on the case at hand. As the trial progressed, the teen continued to methodically dismantle the prosecution's evidence. With every witness called, he found new ways to expose flaws and raise reasonable doubt. His cross-examinations were precise, challenging testimony without aggression, instead relying on calm logic and well-founded questions. A particularly pivotal moment came when the defense called a forensic specialist to testify about the mishandling of key evidence. The expert explained, in clear terms, how improper storage and chain of custody violations could compromise the sample's reliability. The courtroom listened intently, the judge furrowing his brow as he considered the implications. The prosecution attempted to counter by calling a detective who insisted that procedures had been followed. Yet, under the young attorney's questioning, even the detective admitted there were lapses and oversights. The defense seized this moment to emphasize the importance of integrity in evidence collection. Throughout the day, the judge became more engaged, occasionally asking pointed questions about legal nuances and evidentiary rules. The teen responded confidently, citing case law and statutes with impressive fluency. The courtroom was no longer a place for juvenile mockery, but a battleground where intellect and preparation reigned supreme. Outside, news of the courtroom's unexpected drama had gone viral. Social media feeds buzzed with clips of the young attorney's sharp questioning and measured arguments. Legal forums debated his techniques, praising his maturity and command of the law. The teen had become a symbol of perseverance and brilliance, inspiring many who doubted the limits of youth. By late afternoon, the prosecution's case was visibly weakened. Their witnesses were less sure, their evidence more fragile. The young attorney's calm, respectful approach had not only preserved courtroom decorum, but had won the jury's attention and doubt about the charges. As the court adjourned for the day, the judge addressed both sides with newfound respect. "This case has been an eye-opener," he said. "Counselor, your dedication and skill are commendable. We will resume tomorrow for closing arguments. The young lawyer packed his materials quietly. Despite the growing attention and pressure, he remained grounded, focused on the ultimate goal: justice for his client. Outside the courthouse, the day's events sparked conversations among legal professionals and the public. The teenagers' performance was more than a novelty. It was a reminder that talent and hard work could break down even the most stubborn barriers. The courtroom was unusually quiet as the final day of the trial began. Tension hung in the air like a heavy curtain, every eye fixed on the young attorney who had transformed from a subject of mockery to the focal point of respect and anticipation. Reporters lined the back of the room, cameras trained on the courtroom as the jury prepared to hear the closing arguments. The judge cleared his throat, calling the court to order. "Counselor," he said, "you may proceed with your closing argument." The young lawyer rose smoothly, his posture calm and composed. He walked slowly to the center of the courtroom, facing the jury with a steady gaze. There was no hint of arrogance or bravado, only quiet confidence. His voice was clear and measured, every word carefully chosen. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "this case is about more than just evidence or testimony. It is about justice, fairness, and the responsibility we all share to ensure the truth prevails." His eyes swept the room, pausing briefly on each juror. "Throughout this trial, you have heard testimony from witnesses whose memories faltered under scrutiny, evidence that was mishandled, and claims that simply do not hold up under careful examination." He then recounted the key points that undermined the prosecution's case. The store clerk's account was uncertain. The security footage was inconclusive. The forensic evidence was compromised. Reasonable doubt remains, and that doubt must guide your verdict. The courtroom was rapt. The judge watched silently, the usual stern expression softened by what seemed like genuine interest. The young attorney continued, "The law requires that guilt be proven beyond a reasonable doubt, not on assumptions or incomplete evidence. When there is uncertainty, the only just outcome is acquittal." His voice carried an earnestness that resonated deeply. As he concluded, he offered a gentle but firm appeal. "I ask you to consider the facts carefully and return a verdict that upholds the principles of justice." He returned to his seat without ceremony, his face calm but resolute. The prosecution's closing was noticeably shorter and less confident. Their attempts to refute the defense's points felt rushed and unconvincing. The courtroom sensed the shift in momentum had become irreversible. Once the closing statements were complete, the judge gave final instructions to the jury. His tone was clear and deliberate as he reminded them of their duty to be impartial and deliberate. The jury then retired to deliberate. Outside the courtroom, a buzz of anticipation grew. Reporters whispered about the unlikely legal star who had captivated the courtroom with his composure and sharp mind. The defendant's family huddled together, hope lighting their faces after days of tension. Inside the deliberation room, the jurors reviewed the evidence meticulously. The young attorney's clear and logical presentation had made a strong impression. Doubts raised throughout the trial echoed in their discussions. After several hours, they reached a verdict. The courtroom was silent as the jury filed back in. The foreperson stood and announced, "We find the defendant not guilty." A collective gasp filled the room. The defendant's relief was palpable, tears streaming down her cheeks as she embraced the young attorney. The judge banged his gavel lightly to restore order. As people began to file out, the judge addressed the young lawyer. "Counselor," he said with a firm nod, "you have done an exceptional job. This court acknowledges your skill and dedication." The young attorney nodded respectfully. "Thank you, Your Honor. I'm grateful for the opportunity to serve justice." Outside, the media swarmed the courthouse steps. Clips of the trial, especially the judge's initial skepticism and the young attorney's ultimate triumph, had gone viral online. The story became a beacon of hope and inspiration, demonstrating how determination and skill could overcome bias and doubt. The young lawyer, still modest, declined interviews for the moment, choosing instead to focus on his next case. But it was clear. He had arrived as the courtroom emptied. The buzz of excitement lingered like an electric charge. Reporters clustered near the exits, eager to capture every word and reaction. The defendant's family hugged the young attorney, there, gratitude shining through tears and smiles. But amid the applause and congratulations, one figure remained seated, the judge. His eyes followed the teenager as he gathered his belongings, a thoughtful expression on his face. When the last of the spectators had gone, the judge descended from the bench and approached the young lawyer. The room was hushed, the weight of a moment undeniable. "Counselor," the judge began, his voice steady but warm, "I owe you an apology." The teen paused, looking up. "I understand, Your Honor," he said quietly. The judge nodded. "When you first arrived, I underestimated you. I judged you by your age and appearance rather than your skill and preparation. That was wrong. Today, you have reminded us all of the power of dedication and talent, regardless of age." The young attorney smiled, a mixture of relief and pride in his eyes. "Thank you, Your Honor. I've always believed that respect is earned, not given." The judge extended his hand. "You have earned mine and the court's." The handshake was firm, a symbol of mutual respect forged through hard work and perseverance. Word of the case spread rapidly beyond the courthouse. News outlets featured headlines celebrating the teenager's remarkable victory. Social media exploded with praise, sharing clips of his poised arguments and the judge's sincere concession. Legal forums debated the impact of such young talent. Entering the profession, many inspired by his example. Despite the newfound attention, the young attorney remained grounded. Interviews and invitations poured in, but he chose to focus on his clients and his continuing education. His goal was not fame, but justice. Back at his modest office, he reflected on the journey. The road had been anything but easy. Skepticism, mockery, and doubt had been constant companions. But each challenge had strengthened his resolve. He knew that every case, every courtroom, was a new opportunity to prove himself and to make a difference. For his client, the verdict meant freedom and a fresh start. For the judge, it was a lesson in humility and the danger of assumptions. And for everyone who witnessed the trial, it was a reminder that talent and determination can shatter even the toughest barriers. The young lawyer's story became more than a courtroom drama. It became a symbol of perseverance, respect, and the unyielding pursuit of justice. His victory was not just in winning a case, but in changing perceptions and inspiring others to believe in their potential, no matter their age or background. As he closed his office door that evening, the young attorney looked ahead with quiet confidence. The journey was far from over, but he was ready. He had earned his place, not just in the courtroom, but in the hearts and minds of those who believed in fairness and the rule of law. And so, with humility and determination, he prepared for the battles yet to come, knowing that the respect he had finally earned would carry him forward.